This meeting is being recorded.
It's an update for Zoom, a very loud recording. Welcome to Thursday Book Club with my guest today, Lisa Millar. I'm coming to you from Gadigal land of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. If you are new to us, just let me tell you briefly about Thursday Book Club. It's a weekly book club. It's very relaxed. It's half an hour. You don't have to read any particular book. You come in, you say hi, and we have a chat. Once a month, we're lucky enough to have a guest author. You'll be well familiar with Lisa Millar, and we're so delighted, Lisa, that even though you've been up since 3 a.m. this morning, you've made time for us. Welcome to you.
Thanks very much. Well, the other bonus, Suzanne, is that I don't have to get up at 3 a.m. tomorrow. I'm not doing the show tomorrow. So we can talk for hours. Don't worry about half an hour.
And even if you're up most days at 3 a.m., you can still get yourself back to sleep again.
I can. But all weekends I'll wake up at 3 a.m. My body clock is set for 3 a.m., but I can send myself back to sleep on weekends. During the week, I don't need a second alarm or a third alarm. I am up and I've gone. And I think it comes from that whole time when I was a foreign correspondent and the phone would ring in the middle of the night and there'd been a disaster or a terror attack or an earthquake, and the message would just be, we've booked you on a 6 a.m. flight, or get to the office, you've got to go live immediately. And I was so used to just going from fast asleep to wide awake in seconds that I think that is just ingrained in me now.
Oh, that's actually quite a talent, I think.
I don't know whether I put it on my CV. Lisa Millar, very good at waking up quickly.
When I was out at uni, when I was just out of uni, I travelled with my then partner to Morocco, and we were on this bus, a really scary bus, where we were going up a mountain and on a very narrow road. And I was so scared, I managed to send myself to sleep, which I can't do anymore. But it's not a bad way, actually. I mean, there was no flight or fight. It was just fall asleep.
It's almost like you put yourself into a coma to avoid the threat around you.
Let me give you a bit of introduction. I don't think you need an introduction. I think everybody will know you from one of your iterations career-wise. At the moment, of course, you're the co-host of ABC News Breakfast, having returned to Australia after a very lauded career in both London and Washington, DC, covering enormous stories that we'll talk about later, and also, of course, winning a Walkley Award. But what we're here to talk about mainly today is your memoir, which is Daring to Fly. And it was published by Hachette last year to great acclaim, and was also longlisted, I understand, for the Abbey Awards. Was that a nice surprise for you?
It was a great surprise. I was actually at a business lunch when that happened, and I didn't even know that it might have been a thing. And I went to the bathroom during the lunch period at about 3:30 p.m. and I might have had a wine or two, and I saw my phone. It's like missed call, text messages. Even my bookshop down the road from me in Melbourne had texted me to say, congratulations, you're on the long list. So I thought, oh, this must be significant, because Suzanne, this has been the whole thing about this book venture for me, is that I went into it so completely ignorant of the publishing industry, even how to write a book. I mean, I actually downloaded and read a book called How to Write a Memoir. Like, that is where I was starting with my knowledge base.
And speaking of that, what most interested me, and I think we've spoken about this before, what I tend to do with any book that I'm reading, regardless what I'm reading it for pleasure, for judging, for reviewing, I'll go straight to the acknowledgements page. You find a lot out about an author from the acknowledgements. And I think it's perhaps even the first sentence in your acknowledgements is this one: to say I was a reluctant memoirist, or memoir writer, is to put it mildly. So why were you reluctant, and what changed your reluctance into this book?
Well, it's a funny story. So I had been approached by a few different publishers over the years, um, whether it was the fact that I'd done quite a few high-profile stories overseas, and they thought, oh, here's a woman who's a foreign correspondent, maybe she can tell a rollicking tale, and I can recall one publisher calling me at on January the 4th, 2017, and I had just walked back in the door into my home in London after covering a terrorist attack in Istanbul where 30 people had been shot dead on New Year's Eve in a nightclub. And I'd walked back into my home in London. I'd forgotten that on New Year's Eve I had cooked fish for dinner and I'd left the heating on. And when the phone call had come to say there'd been an attack, I just went. And so I walked back into this apartment and the smell was rank. And I thought, what is my life? Like I couldn't even get through January the 1st without having my life topsy-turvy. And a publisher called me and said, hey, I want to talk to you about maybe writing a book. And I said, I couldn't possibly write a book. I've just walked in the door and the heating's on and the fish stinks and I've got smelly clothes and I've just been dealing with dead people. And she said, and that is your opening paragraph. And I didn't end up publishing with that person, but that story does appear in the book, that, coming home and sort of realizing that things were very quickly getting out of control for me because of these events that were out of my control. So here I am, I've returned to Australia. I've told my family in Queensland that, yes, I'm taking the job at News Breakfast in Melbourne, but don't worry, I can come home every second weekend to Queensland. I will see them. I will make up for lost time. And of course, COVID hit and I didn't get home at all to Queensland and saw them all less than I saw them for the years that I was overseas. And that's when I was approached by another publisher who, in her incredible persuasive way, encouraged me to write a few words and then write a few more. And she said, you might just enjoy it. Why don't you write 2,000 words? And so I wrote 2,000 words and I said to her, I'm not enjoying it. So thank you for the offer. And she said, well, that's a pity because I've given it to the bosses at Hachette and they would like 87,000 more. So keep writing. And that's how it happened.
So that sounds like someone that may either know you well or know your temperament well, because it seems to me that when you're given a deadline, you will meet it no matter what the hurdle.
I think she just got lucky. It was Louise Adler, who is now going to be the boss of the Adelaide Writers Festival. She has an incredible reputation. I don't know how she did it, but she nailed me as someone who always meets a deadline, never misses a plane, always turns up early, always wants to make sure, that I do the job and I do it well. And when she said to me, write 2,000 words and give it to me in a fortnight, I delivered it in 10 days, so she didn't know me, but she really nailed my personality.
You've called this memoir Daring to Fly, and it's a good title because, of course, you come from a flying family. You've spent your career flying. You've had a fear of flying and you've overcome it. Lisa Millar, you're a woman who not only grew up with a family car, but a family aeroplane. Were you an unlikely family to have a family aeroplane or a very likely family?
No, unlikely, because even in the day they were expensive and mum and dad were dairy farmers. They didn't have a lot of money. They'd got married very young. They were public servants in Sydney, packed everything into the car and moved to Billawheeler in Queensland to start dairy farming, not knowing one end of the cow from the other. And my 3 older brothers and sisters were born. They're much older than me. By the time I came along, my dad was still desperate in his 40s to live through this dream that he had, that he would one day fly. he was so desperate to fly and to learn how to fly, but of course didn't have the money for it or the wherewithal, that he actually got the slasher out on the farm, so the sort of big farm-sized mower, and he created his own runway. It was almost a kilometre long, and he would get my older brothers and sisters to pick up all the rocks so it wouldn't get into any aircraft that he was hoping would then land on this strip in Kilkheven on this farm 3 hours northwest of Brisbane. Reminded me of that great baseball movie in America, The Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. That was kind of how Dad approached, um, you know, flight. Like, he'd always dreamed of it. He served in World War II, but he didn't fly in World War II because his mother begged him not to. She was worried that he would die overseas, and he ended up having another incredible career as a serviceman. But the plane then came into being, and the front of that cover, the cover of the book, is me on our Piper Cherokee that was bought by my grandmother. Not my dad's mum, but my mum's mum. So Dad's mother-in-law finally decided that she would make the dream come true for her son-in-law. So we had the plane before Dad even had his solo license. He got special dispensation to keep flying the plane to his flying lessons about an hour away in Maroochydore and be able to fly home at night in the plane. So it was an incredible story. And that plane then stayed with us for 10 years, and its call sign was India Echo Charlie, which was named after my grandmother, Ida Emma Cooper. And one of the most magical things, Suzanne, about writing the book, and there have been some magical things about it, is that I've found the plane and I've gone and met the person who now owns it. It's still flying 51 years later, and it's on a farm owned by a grazier in Queensland. It's been all over Australia. It's been in Western Australia for years. It was flying around the Kimberleys. It was in the Northern Territory, and it's back in Queensland. And that moment of discovering that the plane that had been another member of our family still existed and was still flying was just so magical. It was awesome. I actually felt nervous when I had arranged with the grazier to go and meet him and to see India Echo Charlie for the first time after so long.
And tell me, had that grazier said to you, Lisa, would you like to come for a spin in it? What would your answer have been? Yes or no?
Oh, yes, absolutely yes. And he apologised that he couldn't, but it was due for a service, and he had to get it to Rockhampton with the number of kilometres that he had left on it before he had to have the service. So it was basically grounded till he was going to take off and fly it to Rocky. But we're still in touch. I messaged him the other day and said, people keep asking me how the plane's going, and he said, fantastic. And he filmed a bit of video. He was actually in it flying at that time. And I said, hang on, are you allowed to text and fly at the same time? And he said, there are no cameras up here.
You've said yes. If you'd been offered a flight, you would have taken it. For those people who haven't read your book as yet, that might be that might be an odd answer to give, given that all the publicity has been about your fear of flying. And whilst I don't want to ask you about the fear of flying and how it was overcome, it really is a very interesting story as to how the young aviator becomes a young foreign correspondent, and at one point there's fear. What I want to talk to you about now is also something that's relevant to fear, and it's about your early time as a journalist when you were working on police reports. And correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that the role of a young journalist might be to do what's called a death knock. Can you first explain what a death knock is and tell me if you've had an experience with that?
I did death knocks almost every day. What would happen is that I would start work on a tabloid newspaper in Brisbane, and I'd start work at about 4 a.m. And the chief of staff would say to me, um, whatever had happened overnight, a house had burned down, a car had crashed, someone had been killed. I was then instructed with a photographer to go to that person's house, to go to whoever was the grieving family and try and get the story. And there are people in my industry who have done it in ways that I think are quite shameful, who have preyed on vulnerable people, who've stolen photographs from inside lounge rooms of grieving families. I hope you don't judge the industry as a whole because of that. I was very young and I just felt like it was my job. I had to go and do it. I never pushed anyone if they said no, but I would just say to them, look, I'm Lisa Millar. I'm from The Sun. I'm so sorry for your loss. Would you like to say anything, or would you like to share your wife's, husband's, son's story? I've always wondered, Suzanne, what had happened to those people over the years. I'd always wondered whether I had increased their grief by intruding on their life at that moment. It's something that I've even thought about, maybe that might be something I write about at some stage, to try and find these people. You know, I can remember a lot of the stories. So picture this. I'm in Dalby in Western Queensland for a writers' festival in March of this year. And this woman comes up to me and she's in her late 60s and she's got my book and she said, Lisa, I loved your book. Would you mind signing it for me? And I just thought it was fantastic. And she paused and then she said, you knocked on my door 31 years ago. And I mean, I almost stopped breathing because I knew exactly what she meant just by saying, you knocked on my door. And I asked her what the circumstances were, and she said my husband had died. And I said, I'm sorry, can you tell me what had happened to him? And she said he was on a windsurfer. And I put my hand on her hand and I stopped her there and I said, I know the story. He was out windsurfing and he got hit by another windsurfer and his ribs pierced his heart and he was killed instantly. And you had a 6-month-old baby and you lived in front of a flower farm. And she was clearly, after 31 years, shocked that I remembered all that. But I said to her, I remembered those stories. I remembered those stories. Well, we both started having a cry. And this is just before I was supposed to go on stage and give the keynote address at this writers' festival. And I said to her, and I'm only repeating this story now because she's given me permission to do so. And she would like me to write about this encounter. And I will at some point sit down and put down the words. But I said to her, I would like to ask you something that has always bothered me. Did I make your grief worse by knocking on your door? And she said no. She said no. She said actually that she didn't really remember me. She remembered the photographer. And I was okay with that. In fact, I thought it was great that if she didn't really remember me, then I can't have been too intrusive or too in her face. And she also said, I loved it that you spelled his name right. And it's one of the things that I always tell young reporters, that one of the worst things you can do if you're writing about loss and grief is to add insult to the injury by not even being able to get the facts right. So, it's something, and that just was, rammed home to me again by meeting Mary Kim, her name was, and just, yeah, incredible experience, because we all have moments in our lives where we think, I wonder whatever happened to that person, or I wonder. And so for 31 years to have passed and for us to have that encounter there in Dalby, of all places, was quite remarkable.
And you said she didn't remember you, but clearly something must have triggered when she read the book, because it's not mentioned in your book.
No, but her sister-in-law, her sister-in-law one day when they'd been watching the news, so her husband's sister had said, "You know, it was Lisa Millar who knocked on your door that day." And she went, "Really?" And her sister-in-law said, "Yes, I remember it." So the sister-in-law had remembered it. The sister-in-law, who interestingly is still struggling to process her brother's death and still grieves. And Mary Kim and I talked a lot about that. Mary Kim's remarried. That 6-month-old baby is now a healthy 32-year-old son who she has a wonderful relationship with. She still lives in the house in front of the flower farm. She'd driven 3 hours to come to Dalby to see me that day. So it had been something important for her as well, I guess, to have that connection.
It can't be easy to be the point of call for people who have just had their own tragedy. And in some ways, I can identify with what you write about in your book. So I used to be a member of the Refugee Review Tribunal, which involves questioning people about their claims for asylum. And of course, you're their judge, but also their interviewer. And so you have to learn ways to both ask incisive questions without being more forceful or making anything more difficult than it needs to be. And I thought of that when I read about your interaction with the family of a young man called Van Wyn. Can you tell me a little bit about Van Wyn?
Van Wyn was a young Melbourne man. He had a twin brother who'd been in a bit of trouble, and Van Wyn decided that he would try to get his brother out of debt by doing his one and only drug run to Asia from Melbourne. And he got caught as he was transiting in Singapore. And for several years, there was a lot of effort to try and get him released because Singapore has a death penalty, including John Howard at the time, Alexander Downer, the foreign minister. They were all pushing to have Van Wyn come back and serve his sentence in Australia at least. I was sent at short notice in the last 2 weeks before the hangman was due at the gallows to kill Van Nguyen in Singapore at Changi Prison. And I spent those 2 weeks outside the prison, basically, watching his mum and his friends coming in from Melbourne. It was the first time in my career that I understood, and it wasn't until after he had been killed that I understood what my job might be doing to me, that there is only so much secondary trauma that you can absorb before your cup is full of that trauma and you have a deep sadness. And I felt it when I came, and and his friends were lovely. I stayed in touch with them for a while. I tried to get in touch with his mum again when I was writing the book, but she doesn't want to talk about it anymore, and I can understand that. So I let her be, of course. But when I got back to Australia, I was listening to a radio news story a couple of days after I'd returned from Singapore and after he'd died. His body had been brought back to Melbourne, and there was a radio news story about his funeral. And it started with the music of Ave Maria, which was what the other prisoners had sung to him as he was being walked to the gallows in Singapore at Changi Prison. And just hearing that music triggered that memory of just a few days earlier when I'd been standing outside the prison. And I started crying and I couldn't stop. I was in the car and I had to pull over on the freeway because I felt so consumed by this inexplicable grief. And I thought, what is wrong with me? This is not normal. And that was back in 2005. So almost 20 years later, I've now learned that's normal. That's normal. If you're not you're not a human if you're not affected by the stories that you do. So I've been able to go on and do all of those subsequent stories, whether it's the shooting at Sandy Hook in Connecticut when 20 young children were killed, or whether it was the terrorist attacks in Europe. I've been able to do them and maintain an equilibrium, I guess, knowing that it is okay to feel emotion, that we are not bulletproof and we don't have to pretend to be bulletproof. And I think that's the thing that surprised me so much about the book, Suzanne, and the reaction to it was that people were saying, oh, you were so honest, and you sort of shared all your vulnerabilities and insecurities and your mistakes, and weren't you worried about doing that? I hadn't thought about being worried about that at all. I thought, why would I try to pretend to be anything else? Like, it's okay to say that I was scared, or I was uncertain, or there were moments where I didn't know what I was doing. There were moments where I made mistakes and screwed up, and I'm still here.
But making the change from the person who asks the questions, who reflects back to the subject, to have the light reflected on you, did that take a bit of a brain change?
Yes and no. I think the fact that I was in COVID lockdown when it was happening, that I was being guided by the publisher who every week would say, give me 4,000 words about your grandmother. Give me 4,000 words about moving to the US. Give me 4,000 words about doing an Olympic distance triathlon, which was a crazy thing I did, because the first thing I had to do was learn how to swim properly to actually do that. I mean, who signs up for an Olympic distance triathlon not knowing how to swim properly? I do. But all of those things, I had the encouragement and the support to do it. And it also, because we lost mum and dad a few years ago, and there's 5 of us in the family, I've got 2 brothers and 2 sisters, and we range in age over 22 years. So my eldest brother is 73. He'll be about to turn 74. And it gave us a chance to all have some really lovely conversations. And so I interviewed all of them. We had lots of WhatsApp conversations checking on, did my brother get expelled from school in grade 12 or not? Or was that just family folklore? That was a wonderful side benefit that I hadn't been anticipating.
We've got to 8:30. I'm just going to open the floor for questions. What I'm going to ask you to do to make it manageable is any question you've got, if you could just pop it in the chat and I'll ask it for you of Lisa. In the meantime, Lisa, I've been thinking I've had a bit of a problem, and I'm wondering if you could help me with this. During COVID, I found myself scrolling almost entirely about the royal family, in particular Kate Middleton and her children, and also Meghan and Harry. And I thought, as you've said about emotional impact, I thought this was perhaps a very odd reaction. But then I listened to an interview about you covering Harry and Meghan's wedding, and I'm wondering whether my interest is an abnormal one or something less so.
Well, nothing is abnormal. Nothing's abnormal, Suzanne. But the reason why I became a bit fascinated with covering, especially Meghan and Harry's wedding, was that there had been so many bad stories. Brexit, the Grenfell building fire. It was just one after another. And suddenly here was this very joyful event that everyone was getting behind. 100,000 people turned up in Windsor. The sky was blue, the sun was out. I mean, that was a miracle in itself in England. And it was so lovely. And so I really got into the spirit of it. And, there's a photo that I have in the book of me shouting out at Harry, looking like I'm, trying to convince him to change his mind and marry me instead. But really, I was being very deliberate with my shouting, because the 2 princes, the day before the wedding, were coming out of Windsor Castle and they were going to walk down the street to say hello to everyone who was camping out to see them and to see the, the wedding the next day. And I was desperate for Harry to not walk down the other side of the street and away from my camera. So I was actually yelling out to just try and get him to turn his head, which he did. It worked. But little did I know that all the photographers from the other side, on the other side of the street, were the Hollywood celebrity paparazzi photographers. And someone took a photo of me at that moment, and it went onto an LA celebrity website. And I was basically captioned as, some crazy fan in Windsor, you know, yelling out at Harry saying, I love you, Harry. Actually, I said, how do you feel? I mean, the oldest, most boring question ever for a journalist, but I just needed something to get him to sort of turn around and acknowledge me. So we had the shot that we needed.
Funny. What I find interesting is how much your book talks about not only family, to whom you're clearly very close, but also the value of friendship, and particularly friendship amongst fellow journalists. What has been the what comfort or what value do you place on these friendships?
There's a few different things going on there, Suzanne. I'm in Canberra tonight because I'm doing some filming for ABC TV tomorrow on the Australian Peacekeepers anniversary, which is coming up, 75th anniversary, which is why I'm not going to be on News Breakfast in the morning. But I had dinner tonight with my old flatmate from 33 years ago and his wife, and we've all stayed very, very close. I think the fact that it is an unusual job that we all do. We do throw ourselves into the line of fire when other people are running away. And one of the reasons we can get comfort from maintaining those friendships is that we all kind of understand what drives us, and we also know how to be that support mechanism. We've got a program within the ABC called the Peer Support Program, which is very much like what you'll find in the ambulance service and the fire brigade service. And when people have done particularly tough stories, it could be a cadet heading out to their first car accident. We try to debrief with them. I've learned a lot about how to feel better about some of the situations that I've been in. And one of the things I've learned is that if you feel that your work is worthy, if you feel that you are doing it for a good reason, then that makes you feel better about what you're having to confront or do. For example, I've stayed in touch with one of the mothers of one of the young children at the Sandy Hook school shooting, which is now a decade ago. And we've stayed in touch. And at the time, I knew she wanted to get a message out about gun laws in America, and she wanted that connection with Australia because what had happened in Australia with gun laws. And so there was a sense that I wasn't just being a vulture wanting her tears on camera or wanting, the story just for the sake of the story. It was a sense that I was doing something that had some kind of worthiness that was helping someone else, and it's people in our industry and friends in our industry who sort of get that and understand that. That's a long answer, I think, to that question, Suzanne, but I hope it kind of explains it a little bit.
And just to continue from that question, if you had to encapsulate it, what would you say is the value of journalism, and what for you is good journalism?
Gosh, that is a huge question. What is good journalism? Well, good journalism is telling me details about the house that burned down on the corner of the street last night. I'm making that up. It hasn't. But, good journalism is whatever you need. If it's telling you the facts of where, what, how, when, why. But good journalism was also, beautifully crafted, long features in the paper on the weekend that you can spend an hour with and be swept away to another part of the world, or you learn things. I mean, there's so many things that fall into that category of good journalism. And also, journalism is now being done on TikTok as well. And I don't want to be one of these people who dismisses the newness of what we're seeing and how social media, which there are so many bad things about social media with its misconstruing of facts and deliberate misleading, but there is also some really fun and innovative ways that it's being used to deliver news. And TikTok is one of them, quite frankly. Yeah, so I'm trying to keep learning what journalism can be as we go forward as well. Even though I'm sort of getting to the other end of my career, I'm hoping I can still learn a lot.
And for any young journalists out there or emerging journalists, is there any words of wisdom you've got, any piece of advice?
Yeah, I just think you've got to be curious, and you're never going to be able to stay in an industry that is constantly changing if you're not curious and passionate. I think about when I started at the Gympie Times, and I used to have to type up my stories on butcher paper in the typewriter, and then go out to the subs and the compositors at the back, and the stone was laid out. I mean, this is only 1988 was when I started at the Gympie Times. Now I'm, coming home, throwing on my tracksuit pants, putting on a bit of lipstick, opening up my laptop and interviewing Daniel Craig for the launch of 007. I mean, honestly, that was one of those nights where I was in my lounge room at home and I'm chatting to Daniel Craig as I'm chatting to you now and thinking, it's bloody James Bond and I'm in my tracksuit pants. I mean, really. So how much has journalism changed in that short amount of time? I think it's had more change than just about any other industry I know, the industries that still exist, quite frankly.
And I think that's a terrific image to leave us with, the image of you interviewing James Bond in your tracksuit pants with your lipstick on. Lisa Millar, thank you so very much for your time today. You've been very generous. And your book, Daring to Fly, is a remarkable book. It's a book that made me think we were friends, Lisa. I read it,
I'm glad.
and I thought, well, this is my friend and she's writing a book for me. And I think perhaps that explains, apart from the interest of the content, just why it's taken off and why people have felt so warmly towards it. So congratulations.
Oh, thank you, Suzanne.
For the time.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us.
And everybody else, we'll see you next week. Thanks again, Lisa.
See you, Suzanne. Bye-bye, everyone.